All right, here are the solutions to lessons 10 and 11. We'll do 10 first. The first two pages are from lesson 10 in unit 3, and the last three are from lesson 11. So starting out here, select all the true statements for the first one. So the square root of -1 is an imaginary number. That's true. Now we have a definition for that. Letter B, there are no real numbers that satisfy the equation x is equal to -1. That's true also. There's no real numbers. But now that we have imaginary numbers, we can use those in this case. Letter C says because the square root of -1 is imaginary, no one does math with it. That's not true. Letter D says the equation x squared is equal to -1 has real solutions, and we just said that no, there are none, so that's false. And the last one, E, the square root of -1 is equal to -1 because -1 times -1 is equal to -1. And that's false because we can't multiply two negatives and get a negative. So number 2, plot each number on a real number line and explain why the number is not on the real number line. So we'll want to take that first one, letter A, and we're going to plot that. The square root of 4, we're going to plot that right here. That's 2. So I'll just put it like that. Letter B, the negative square root of 4. So that would be -2. Letter C, the real number line has no solutions here, so we cannot do that one. Letter D, the square root of 8. We know that 2 squared is 4 and 3 squared is 9, so the square root of 8 is going to be somewhere close to 3, but not quite there, so we'll call that the square root of 8. And then the negative square root of 8 for letter E would be over on this side, and looks like that. So those are the ones that we can plot. The last one we cannot plot because it's the square root of a negative number, and again we're dealing with the real number line, so that one does not work. Number 3, we have x minus 4 squared is equal to -9.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
I'm looking at.
Can it wait?
Yeah, is that one?
Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Explain why x minus 4 quantity squared has no real solutions. One reason is because this side of the equation is positive. When we square anything, we will get a positive result. And this side is negative, so we can't have a positive equal to a negative number. That's one reason. The other reason is squaring results in a positive value, so we can't square something and get a negative result. Number 4, which value is closest to 10 to the -1/2? So this is from lesson 5. So in unit 2, so we're going to first of all, we want to deal with positive exponents only, so I'm going to shift that to the denominator. And then I'm going to write it as a radical down here. And I'm going to think about, we want the closest one. So we're estimating here, but the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. So it's got to be close to 3, the square root of 10. But it's in the denominator, so I would choose letter C there. Number 5, which is a solution to this equation? So we're going to start out by subtracting 5 from both sides, and we'll have the square root of 6 minus x is equal to 5, and then we'll square both sides. So we have 6 minus x is equal to 25. And lastly, we're going to subtract 6 from both sides, So we get negative x is equal to positive 19. And then divide by negative 1 on both sides, and we get x is equal to negative 19. So A is our result there. A is the answer for number 5. Number 6, select all equations for which negative 64 is a solution. Okay, so for the first one, letter A, that would not work because we can't take the square root of a negative number and get a positive result there, or a real number result. Letter B, same thing. We don't get a real number result when we take the square root of a negative number. Letter C, the cubed root of negative 64 is not positive 4, but it is negative 4. So D is going to work there. Even in this case, E, we still are trying to take the square root of a negative 64, a negative number, even with this out in front, this negative. So that will not work. But F works because we're taking the negative of that negative 64 under the radical already. So this becomes the square root of positive 64 equal to 8. And that's true. So we have two solutions there that work out for us. So that's lesson 10. Now we'll move on to lesson 11. Lesson 11, which point represents the complex number negative 3 plus 2i? So we're going to go over negative 3 on our real number line and go up to 2i here. So it's letter A for number 1. Number 2 says match each expression to an equivalent expression. So 2i times 8 is just, we can rearrange that and make it 8 times 2i, which is just 16i then. So 16i is number 4, so we'll match that up with number 4. The next one, 16i cubed. So I'm going to take 16i and I'm going to break this up into I squared times I. That's the same thing as I cubed. And then I know that the I squared has to be negative 1 by definition. And so I get 16 times negative 1 times I. And so that's negative 16i. So I would match this one up, letter B, with number 3. Letter C, 2i squared is, or 2i to the 4th would be like 2i times 2i 4 times here. Let's get a different color. So we can multiply all of those 2's together and we'll get 16. And then we have I to the 4th, which is the same thing as 16i times I squared times I squared, which is the same thing as 16 times negative 1 times negative 1, which is the same thing as 16. So when you step it out like that and kind of separate it, we're going to get 2 for letter C. And the last one, letter D, we have 2i times 8i. So 2i times 8i, I can rearrange that 2 times 8 and get 16. And I times I will give me I squared. But we know that I squared is negative 1 by definition, and so we get a negative 16 for D. So D is matched with number 1. Number 3, Diego squared a number and got 4. Andre squared a different number and got 4. What were the numbers that Diego and Andre squared? I would say Diego squared maybe 2 and Andre squared maybe negative 2. And both of those would give you 4. So 2 and negative 2. And then for letter B, it says Jada squared a number and got negative 4. And Elena squared a number and got negative 4. They were different numbers. What were the numbers that Jada and Ilana squared? So we're going to take the square root of negative 4 and write it as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 4, or positive 4. So now we can write that as I times 2. And then we can do the same thing with the negative square root of negative 4. If Elena squared this, let's see, maybe I should, if I go back to writing it like this, I can write that as negative 1 times the square root of 4, which would be 2i, or negative 2i. Let's just think of it that way. So we don't have to do the other part there then. So 2i and negative 2i would both square to give you negative 4. Number 4, we're looking at find all solutions to each equation. So we want to take a squared is equal to 1, so we'll take the square root of both sides, and we get a is equal to positive 1 or negative 1. So we can write it as plus or minus 1. For letter B, if we take the square root of both sides there, we get b is equal to plus or minus the square root of 13. For letter C, if we take the square root of both sides there, we get c is equal to the square root of negative 9. And so the square root of negative 9 is I times the square root of 9, which is equal to I times 3 or negative 3. So I'm going to write those in a more familiar form, and we have 3i or negative 3i. And then similarly, if I take the square root of both sides on d here, I'll get d is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 5. And then I want to write the square root of negative 5 as I times the square root of 5. And so I have I times the square root of 5 or negative I times the square root of 5. And then I can just leave them like that. They're best left in that form for if you have a square root, because you don't want to confuse it with that I under the radical or something like that. So we'll just leave it like that. Number 5, these are from the previous week, lesson 8. So we're going to find the exact solutions to each of these equations or explain why there is no solution. So if I cube both sides here to get rid of that radical in letter A, I'm going to end up with a plus 2 on the left equals 64. And then I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I'm going to get a is equal to 62. And so just one solution there. A is equal to 62. The next one, the cubed root of b plus 5 is equal to 4. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get the cubed root of b is equal to a negative 1. And that's no problem because I've got an odd exponent or odd root there. The cubed root of b, if I cube both sides, let's just put it that way, I get b is equal to negative 1 then. And then letter C, I'm going to add 14 to both sides before I do my cubing. And so I end up with the cubed root of c minus 1 is equal to 10. And now I'm going to cube both sides to get rid of my radicals. So I have c minus 1 is equal to 1,000. And then I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get c is equal to 1001 for letter C. Number 6, explain how you know that the square root of negative 1 is not a negative number. When we take the square root, we're saying that that means that we're squaring a number and getting a negative number. So this can't happen since we cannot square a number and have it in, let's just say with a negative result. So I hope this helped, and we'll see you soon.